Since I began the Farbrengen this afternoon, Bichlal by Yidden, we look at everything, how it stands in Torah. In other words, the opening of everything, the source for everything, is Torah. And actually, by doing this, we follow the path of the Rebbeinu Shlom. As we are told by Chazal, that we are to follow what the Rebbeinu does himself. Just like Chazal tell us, Mahu Rachum, Af Ata Rachum. Just like the Rebbeinu is full of Rachamim, full of Rachmanis, we should be the same. So the same thing regarding this inyan, Chazal tell us that before the Rebbeinu created the world, Istakel Be'eraisa Ubara Alma. The Rebbeinu looked into Torah, and that is how he created the world. In other words, Torah was kind of like a blueprint for the Rebbeinu, which he followed when he created the world. And the same thing is constantly the Rebbeinu is creating the world. As we say in davening every day, Hamechadesh Betuvoi Bechol Yom Tamid Maaseh Bereishis. That the Rebbeinu, with his kindness, with his goodness, is renewing constantly the creation. And so all of this, the creation of the world, is in what kind of a way? That when the Rebbeinu is creating the world, he is looking into Torah, and Torah is the blueprint for the creation of the world. The same thing by any inyan which a Yid has to do. So he has to look into Torah, and Torah is to be his guide how we should do each and every inyan. And here the Rebbe says, there's an expression from the Frierdiker Rebbe, when he expressed himself, that by a Yid is nishta stam azoi. There's no such thing stam azoi to do something. Everything which a Yid does, he has to check first in Shulchan Aruch, and check first in Sfarim, and make sure that what he's doing is perfectly okay. This concept that everything has its source in Torah goes to such an extent that there's a Gemara. The Rebbe says this Gemara is not in the Talmud Yerushalmi, but it is in the Talmud Bavli. What is the difference between Yerushalmi and Bavli? Because Bavli is closer to halacha. In Bavli there's more halachas and piskedinim as opposed to the Talmud of Yerushalmi. In the Talmud of Bavli itself, this quotation is in the Gemara, which this Gemara also discusses many, many halachas. It's a Gemara in the Seder of Nezikin, which discusses how a person should prevent himself, hold himself back from damaging, and in the event the damage was done, how he can rectify it. And this is a Masechta Bava Kama. And in Masechta Bava Kama, the Gemara says, the Gemara expresses itself, Minno hanemile de amre inshi, which means, what is the source for the expression of people? In other words, the Gemara goes on with several quotations which people would have an expression. Amre inshi means what people say. So the Gemara says, Minno hanemile de amre inshi. What is the source? Where do we find the Makar in Torah for quotations, for expressions of people? So we see right away, what's the Gemara's approach? That we take for granted that an expression of people has its source in Torah. But this is not the question which the Gemara raises. The Gemara doesn't raise the question, does it have a source in Torah? This is taken for granted that it does. The only thing the Gemara raises the question, Minno hanemile. What is the source for it? For the specific quotations which the Gemara goes on to discuss, what is the source in Torah for? And notice, the Gemara uses the expression, Minno hanemile de amre inshe. What is the source for what people say? Inshe means people. Enosh means a man. Now in Hebrew, there are 4 different classifications to refer to man. Adam, Ish, Enosh, which is Inshe, which we mentioned right now, the Gemara, and Geva. Now naturally, Adam is the person, the highest madrege. Adam is explained in Chassidus, stems from the word Adama le'elyon. He's compared to Elyon, to Rebbeinu Shlom. Enosh means weak. In other words, when we're using an expression, meaning we are talking about a person, but a person how he's defined in a madrega of enosh means he's defined in a madrega of his weakness. And nonetheless we still say, even those people that are classified and go into the category as a low madrega, the madrega of enosh, even them too, their expressions also have their source on Torah. Interesting, how the Rebbe ties it together. We find, in Chumash we find, the third generation of the creation of the world was the generation of Enosh. And that is when Avodah Zarah began in the world. The Pasuk uses the expression, Oz hu chalikhoi b'shem Hashem. When was this? This was the generation of Enosh. Rabbi asks, B'chlal, we know that the Torah is very careful not to tell us anything which puts anyone to shame. There's an expression, the Chazal, afilu bignus behema, even in the gnus, in the shame of a non-kosher behema, the Torah would also refrain from saying such an expression. So why does the Torah have to tell us who was the person in whose generation it began the worshipping of Avodah Zarah that wasn't the generation of Enosh? But this is the lesson which we have in it. And that's why it's important to relate to us. Why was it Take that in that generation Avodah Zarah began? Because the leader of that generation was Enosh. And Enosh is Meloshen Onush, which means Meloshen weakness. And being that the leader of that generation did not have the proper pride, the proper firmness which is needed for a manig of a generation, that is why it was possible that in his doyer it should begin with an inyan of Avodah Zarah. But again, what do we derive from all this? We're deriving that the taitcha of Enosh, as in Enosh, the person Enosh, in whom generation Avodah Zarah began. And the same thing when the Gemara uses the expression we are talking about a person and what type of a madrege, a person in a madrege of Enosh, which means a schwache madrege, a weak madrege, low madrege. And here we are told that even anything which amre inshe, meaning everything which has a shaykhs to Welt, we look up its source, and the source of it is Torah. Just like when we want to find out how something operates, and we want to familiarize ourselves with something. What do? We always go back to the source of this inyan. The same thing when we are getting involved in inyanim of Welt, we have to go to the source of it. What is the source of it? The source of it is Torah. And that is why it says we find that everything that happens in this world also has to be utilized for Kedusha. And that is why when somebody is appointed to a position, or somebody is elected to a position, which is a position of power and influence, the outcome of this should be, or why did all of this really happen? All of this was that he should be able to utilize this position which he is in, and utilize it for what? To be able to strengthen Torah and Yiddishkeit. And especially we know the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. How the Baal Shem Tov teaches us that everything is Ashgacha Pratis. There's nothing which happened coincidental. So Memela, when somebody is appointed to a position of leadership, or whatever position it may be, there's a reason for it. And the reason for it is that he should utilize this position and this influence which he can have on people so that he could bring them closer to Yiddishkeit and closer to the Rebbeinu. The Rebbe says the same thing applies. The Zohar tells us that it will be in the year from after the year 5,600, many inventions will be made in the world. And all these new things that are being introduced in the world today, all these things which modern technology is introducing, there are two ways to look at it. There's one way to look at it and to say that this is something new. Memela, we will stay away from it and we don't want to make use of it. Another way to look at it is, on the contrary, It's something new which was just now introduced. But we have to find how can all of these things be utilized for Torah, for Kedusha. As the Rebbe brings the Medrash, there's a famous Medrash that says, Loi nivra zahav ela b'shvil beis hamikdash. The only reason that the Rebbe created gold was that gold should be able to be used in the Beis Hamikdash. Once it was already created for the Beis Hamikdash, which is there in the Beis Hamikdash, it is one of the major inyanim. Once it was used in the Beis Hamikdash, we too now today have access to make use of gold. What is the v'hachai yitein el liboy? In other words, the Heroah, and as the Rebbe stressed today, not just the Heroah, but a Heroah with chayis, with lebedikait, which we have to derive from all of this is how we have to make use of everything. As the Rebbe mentioned, the fact that a person could speak in one place, and simultaneously he could be heard throughout the entire world. His voice is carried and it's being heard all over, which is also something which new technology has introduced. All of these things, why were they created? They were created so that they could be utilized for Kedusha. And this is what we have to make sure to utilize all these inyanim in Kedusha. And the Rebbe went over to explain how the chayes, the source of life, which is put into everything, is channeled through its name. And that is why we find when the Rebbe created the world, he told Adam Arishon, and he gave him the task that he should name everything which was created in the world. So the question arises, why did the Rebbe need Adam Arishon for that? Why couldn't he give him this task to any of the Malachim as well? Especially if we're talking that language then is a Lashon Heskami. In other words, whatever word they would have chose, that could have remained to be the name of any specific thing which they would have named. So why was there a need to give this responsibility dafke to Adam Arishon? So here the Rebbe explains, the reason for this is, as explained in Chassidus, the name of the thing, that is its chayis. The Malachim, they were not able to have the vision, what is the chayis of every particular animal or behemoth or everything which was created by the Rebbe. It was only Adam Arishon, through the wisdom which the Rebbe gave him, he realized which are the letters that compose a word which will channel the chayis to this specific thing which will get this name. And therefore it was Dafka Adam Arishon who the Rebbe gave him this task that he should name everything. Because it's not stam a name. A name of a thing is the chayis, the getlachkeit, which is channeled to this specific thing and gives it life and existence, that is channeled through its name. And that is why it's also brought in Svarim that when a baby is born, it is the parents who come up with the name, what name will be given to the infant. So it's also explained in Svarim that this is a kind of a Ruach HaKodesh which is given to the parents when they give the name to the child. Why is this? Because this name, which this infant is getting, the boy or the girl, this is the source of chayis for this child for 120 years. And this is something which the Rebbe has entrusted to the parents of the child, that they should choose what name to give him, and through this name the child will receive its chayis. There's a Gemara, the Rebbe says, Gemara tells us that Rab Meir Dorish Bishma, Rab Meir, Tana Rab Meir, possessed this talent that he was able to pick on a person, and through his name he was able to have the insight into the person and really know everything about the person. This corresponds to what we are saying. Why? Because the chayis of the person is channeled through his name. And Rab Meir, the Gemara tells us, the incident which the Gemara tells us about Rab Meir, there Rab Meir had to do with a person who was a gazlan, he was a thief. The Rebbe says, if we're talking about a person who was a thief, we can imagine, there's a Gemara, the Gemara says, Shuchya di'enuka da'avua de'ima. The talk of children, what children usually talk, is what they pick up at home. So if this applies to Dibul, it definitely applies to Maisa. So when we're talking about a person who was a Gazlan, so obviously we can imagine what type of a background he came from. And nonetheless, even with such a person, Rab Meir worked with him, and as the Gemara tells us, Dorish Bishma, he dashed his name, and he looked into, in other words, he looked into the in-depth of the person, and tried to help this person. It was here in the Sikha also, I don't remember the exact, how the Shaykhs was, but the Rebbe mentioned that there is a story related through the Frierdiker Rebbe about the Tzemach Tzedek. That when the Tzemach Tzedek would learn, he would sit and learn, and he would want to have a harchava, in other words, really broaden his mind to be able to understand the Inyan and Torah which he's learning properly. The Tzemach Tzedek would take a bunch of gold coins and keep them in front of him and would play with these coins, and this had an effect on the Tzemach Tzedek that it created a kind of a harchava, a breitkeit in him, so that the Inyanim and Torah which he learned, he was able to understand them better. Getting back,
This was the Rebbe, which Rebbe?
getting back to the Inyan with the contents of the Sikha. So basically, what the Rebbe is bringing out is how we find that everything which was created in the world and everything which a person comes into contact with in the world, what is all this about, so that should be uplifted and utilized for Kedusha, for serving the Rebbe. And here we come to this week's Sedra. This week's Sedra begins, V'hoya Eikev Tishmiu. So Chazal tell us, wherever we find the expression of the Hoya is a lashon of simcha, it's a lashon of happiness. Vayehi, on the contrary, is a lashon tsar, lashon of sadness. The Hoya is a lashon of simcha. What is the explanation? What does it have to do over here? Let me explain. The Hoya really has the lettering of Yud Kei Vav Kei in it. It has the Rebbe's name in it. But it does not have it in the regular way of Yud Kei Vav Kei. It has the Vav Kei comes first and the Yud Kei comes later. By us, in the Rebbe's name comes first Yud Kei, then Vav Kei. In the Hoya, it is the opposite way around. And the Hoya is takenat Hashem Kodesh. It's not treated as the Rebbe's name. But at the same time, it has the same letters as Yud Kei Vav Kei in it. Was meint das? What does it mean in Avodah? In Chassidus it's explained that what is the inyan of Yud Kei and Vav Kei? Yud Kei is the way an inyan where the inyanim are still covered up. Vav always had. Vav is explained that Chassidus always shows an hamshacha, the way inyanim come down milmailo lemata. A revelation is usually reflected through a Vav. So the Vav Kei, this already has to do with the revelation of Getlichkeit, how we see it, how we have access to it. There's a pasuk, Hanistorish Lashem Elokeinu, Vehaniglois Lanu Levaneinu. Nigla means something which is revealed, which could be seen, which is tangible. So what do we say? Vehaniglois. Vav Kei has a shaykhus to niglois. However, Yud Kei, this is something which has a shaykhus to the concealed, to what we do not have access to. If we elaborate on the inyan of Yud Kei Vav Kei and we go a little bit deeper, this has a shaykhus. There's Torah Shebiksav and there's Torah Shebal Peh. Torah Shebiksav, it's explained that Chassidus has a shaykhus to Yud Kei. This is something which we got directly from the Rebishter. Torah Shebal Peh, which includes, as Chazal tell us, Kol Ma Shetalmid Vasik Osid Lachadish. Torah Shebal Peh includes anything which any bright student will be mechadish, will add on his own in Torah. All of this is also part of Torah. This is already the madrega of Torah of Vav Kei. In other words, we have inyanim as they stand mid'oraisa, then there are the inyanim as they come down mid'rabanan, and then there are inyanim and chiyuvim which our obligation is to do it only lifnim mishuras hadin. In other words, if we want to go beyond the obligation of din and fulfill it and go beyond the requirement of halacha, that is when we do Vav Kei. That has a shaykhus to Vav Kei. Yud Kei means the fulfillment of the mitzvahs as of what we are obligated to do mitzad min HaTorah. What are we told here? V'hoya Eikev Tishmiu. This means that when a Yid works with his own koyach ha'avodah, with his own koyachas, and he goes ahead and he gets hold of the Vav K, and the Vav K comes before the Yud K. If I say Vav K comes before the Yud K, this is the stress, how a Yid goes above and beyond the requirement of halacha, the requirement of din, and a lake tzecharayin, and he does it fully, whatever he could only do in the avodah of lifnei mishuras adin, more than din requires us to do. And this is Vav K. However, in this case, it's the Vav K as it comes before the Yud K. Why? Because the Yid is putting himself into it to such an extent that this is his main avodah. In other words, b'koyach atzmoi. There's, explain the Chassidus at length. Every Yid has the koyachas which were given to him, and at the same time, every Yid also possesses a certain amount of inyanim which he can achieve with his own koyachas, with his own strength, which he really, when he really dwells into it properly, and he's trying to achieve and go from madrega to madrega, this is what he's achieving with his own koyachas, with his own strength. And this is the inyan of Vahoya. And that is why Vahoya is a lashon of simcha. It's a lashon of happiness. Why? Because this brings out the advantage, the plus of the avodah b'koyach atzmai which the Yid has done. And here the Rebbe is concluding. This week's Sedra is Pashas Eikev. And it's called, as the pasuk says, V'hoya Eikev Tishmiyum. What is the inyan of Eikev? Eikev means a heel. So Rashi says, as we will get to later, the mitzvahs she'odam dosh ba'akevav, they are the mitzvahs which a person steps on. In other words, mitzvahs which a person does not consider them important. What are we told? V'hoya Eikev Tishmun. There's an inyan of shmiyah and there's an inyan of re'iyah. There is hearing and there is seeing. Chassidus always tells us the plus and the advantage of vision, of re'iyah. Re'iyah naturally is a much higher madrege than hearing. When we hear something, it doesn't have that much of an impact on the person as when we see it. When we see something, it leaves a completely different impression on the person. There is a halacha, the Rebbe brings it many times when he discusses this inyan. Ein eid na'aseh dayin, which means if somebody was a witness to something that happened, he saw something happening, this particular person who saw it happen cannot become a judge on this particular case. And the logic on it is a very obvious one. Why? Because being that he saw it, it left such an impact on him already that he will not be able to be impartial and listen to the Eidos and listen to all the people involved and come out with an honest psak din. Why? Because he saw it. The effect that Riyah has on a person is be'ein haroich, can no way be compared to what Shmiyah has an effect on him. Chazal express it, Einoy doima Shmiyah leRiyah. We cannot compare hearing something to seeing something. Mele Zman HaGolos, time that we're in Golos, that's compared to a time all we can achieve and all we can reach is to the level of Shmiyah. However, when Mashiach will come, then we will be in a madrege of Re'iyah, vision. Sedra, which we began reading today to Mincha, that already is Parshas Re'eh. Sedra that we read in the morning is V'hoya Eikev Tishme'un. This is the Sedra that has to do with Shmiyah, with hearing. And we are told V'hoya Eikev Tishme'un. We are at the end, the heel is at the bottom of a person. We are already at the end of the time of Tishme'un, and we are about to enter the time of Re'ei Anoichi Noisen Lefneichem Ayoim Bracha, which is the Sedra, as the Rebbe said, we read it to Mincha, which Mincha is usually in the later part of the afternoon. However, Al Pi Halacha, a person could have Mincha earlier, right in the beginning of the afternoon, and he could read Re'ei already then. So right away, in other words, it shows us that the first half of the day has a shaykhus to Pashas Eikev, which is V'hoya Eikev Tishmon, and then right after, in the afternoon, we are going over to a higher madrega, to the madrega of Re'eya, Neichi Neisen Lefneichem, the madrega of Re'eya, as the pasuk uses the expression, V'hoyu Einecha, Royois Es Meirecha. When Mashiach will come, and the prophecy is told, then we will be in a position that we will see our teachers. No longer will we receive in a way of Shmiyah, but on the contrary, everything then will be in a way of Re'iyah. See this, it's explained at length. How even the Torah which will be taught when Mashiach will come, everything will be in an oifim of Re'iyah, and when Torah is taught in a way of Re'iyah, simply the accomplishment which one can accomplish in a certain period of time, when he learns through Re'iyah, is be'ein aroich. No way can it be compared to what we have achieved when we were only in a level of Shmiyah. By Re'iyah, the accomplishments are be'ein aroich higher. And this will be when Mashiach will come. Now the Rebbe continues, continuation to what he has spoken about last week Shabbos, and he has also spoken about it Chamisha Asa Ba'av, and that is the inyan of Haisafa. The Gemara tells us regarding 15 days in the month of Av. The Gemara is in the end of Masechta Tainis. The Gemara says, Man de Moisef Yosef, that from the 15th day in Av, Toshash Koicha Shel Chama, the strength of the sun weakens. Memela, the days start becoming shorter, and the nights start becoming longer. The Gemara says, Lo ivra laila elo legirsa. Night was created so that we should be able to learn at night. And the Rebbe expressed himself today, at night we don't have the tumul humul, the noise which we usually have during the day. And that is why night is an appropriate time for learning. And this is what we are told, that as of the 15 days in the month of Av, there's a simon, I think the Rebbe mentioned it last week, Mikumi at Shichvi Kumi. From the time we say the pasuk Kumi Roini Balayla, that is a pasuk in Megillah Seichel, which we say on Tisha B'Av, which is a few days before Chamisha B'Av. In Megillas Rus, which many communities say on Shavuos, there's a pasuk Shichvi. I think Shichvi Pei Halayla is the pasuk, but anyway, Shichvi. So the simon goes from Chamisha B'Av until the following Shavuos, Mikumi at Shichvi Kumi. In other words, from the time we recite the pasuk Kumi until the time we will recite Shichvi Kumi, rise at night to learn Torah. And as the Rebbe was speaking last week and spoke about it, Chamisha B'Av, the Rebbe has stressed it today in a very strong way again. It's extremely important that we utilize this inyan to increase in the learning of Torah, and the learning of Torah, Godel Talmud Shemevi L'Dei Maisa, learning always leads to the fulfillment of mitzvahs. And this is what's demanded from us now, to fulfill this message which we are taking from Chamisha B'Av, from 15 days in the month of Av, which we just had a little more than a week ago. And the Rebbe says, there are those that feel that the approach should be Hatzna Leches im Hashem Elokecha. When you're doing things of Torah, of mitzvahs, keep it quiet, keep it low. The Rebbe says this is not the right reaction when we're talking about these inyanim of Heisafa. There's a Rashba. The Rashba writes in his Shuvas, and it is quoted in the Ramah, where he says, "A mitzvah lefarseim oisei mitzvah." It's a mitzvah to publicize and make it public knowledge of people. Of people that do mitzvahs. Memela, when something is done, something which is in the gather of Heisafa, something which adds on an increase in Torah and mitzvahs, it's like a worthwhile to publicize and make it public knowledge that this person or this group or whatever, they have done this specific inyan of Heisafa. And the Rebbe says when we're talking about Heisafa, we're talking about adding on, increasing. This does not only apply to individuals, the Rebbe says, this applies to institutions as well. And there are people who have been chosen to be on committees of institutions or on the board of the institution, but this does not mean that everything, all the activities of an institution should remain in a stable way, in a stable form. Institutions also have to expand and increase in a form of Haisafa, increasing. It is told that this week, this past Monday, the Rebbe, Monday afternoon after Mincha, Rebbe called in Rabbi Eikev and Dr. Mendel, one of the Rebbe's secretaries. I spoke to them about this inyan of Haisafa, which he began speaking Chamishas B'Av and last Shabbos, and asked them that they relate to all the shluchim in the world and to all the askanim in the world, that he's eager to see Haisafas increases in all inyanim of Torah mitzvahs. And in order that it should be administered properly, the Rebbe has told them, in every city, in every area or city or state or area, however it's found suitable, a committee of 3 should be chosen. And these 3 people should be in charge of Haisafa, of increasing. And these people should also send in, on a regular basis, reports to the committee here in New York, who is in charge on the inyanim of Haisafa, and notify them everything which is taking place on the inyanim of increases in the inyanim of Torah and mitzvahs, all which is coming as an outcome, as a result of, as of Chamisha B'Av, we have to increase in inyanim of Torah and Torah that leads to mitzvahs. And today the Rebbe was also referring, obviously, to this inyan, and referring to the fact that in every area there will be 3 people who will evaluate the Haisafais, the increases that are done. And here the Rebbe went into another inyan. A while ago, Rosh Chodesh Kislev, it was, and then the Rebbe spoke regarding the Shluchim and the Batei Chabad, that all of those that are in debt and chayves, at that time the Rebbe volunteered that 50% of the debts which have accumulated by all the Batei Chabad all over, upon their submitting a financial statement of all their debts, the Rebbe volunteered to give a loan, 50% of whatever they are in debt in, payable, which would be paid back for the period of the following 5 years. The Rebbe referred to this again today. He said that last time when this was discussed, there are those that came with complaints, some that they did get, or they didn't get yet, what was due to them, and so forth, which he's not going to get into right now. But what he is saying is those that will get involved, those institutions obviously, will be involved in inyanim of Haisafa. They will increase upon their regular activities. And as a result of this increase, this will naturally increase their expenses as well. And should it turn out that they will be in a position that the income will not be equivalent to their expense, in other words, their expense will be more than the income, then the Rebbe says it will be seen to it that a participation of 10% of whatever this will amount to will be forwarded to them. But here the Rebbe compared it to what he spoke about last time. He says, but this, he's mentioning it, but not in a way that when one gets it or one doesn't get it, it could be demanded, or those that will not get it right away, they will complain, why didn't they get it? It's not in such a way, but he's letting know that the possibility will be there. In other words, it may come, but it's not a commitment that if you don't get it, you can complain or demand it. And again, he referred to a kind of irony that last time there were those that complained that they didn't get it yet, or they didn't get the full amount they were expecting, or something like it. This, he says, we're not going to get into.
Bills also. Bills.
But what he's just notifying that there will be a participation. And again, everything has to be evaluated by the committee of 3. He says when we're talking about 3 people, question right away arises, who is in the middle, and who is on the right side, and who is on the left side. And this is something which he doesn't mean that a goyrel has to be made, a lot has to be drawn, who should be in the center and who should be at the right and who should be at the left. But the main thing is that it should be organized in a proper way, and that the committee of three in each and every place should evaluate what has transpired and whatever increases have came about. And again, the Rebbe kept on stressing very, very strongly and demanding very much this inyan of a sofa. See to it, each and every one of us individually, as well as for institutions, to simply try and increase and do more and more and constantly look for ways of increasing in Yanim of Limud HaTorah and Torah, which leads to fulfillment of mitzvahs. In the Rashi, as the Rebbe usually refers to explaining a Rashi in this week's Sedre, and it's always on the first Rashi, the Rebbe raised questions. I didn't think he answered them. Rashi explains the first few words of the pasuk. V'hoya Eikev tishmun. Really, what Rashi is trying to explain is the word Eikev. Eikev, we could learn that Eikev means if you will listen to the mitzvahs. However, Rashi here is introducing another taich that Eikev doesn't only mean if, but Eikev here reminds us on the heel of a person. Was meint das? Im ha mitzvahs kalis, simple mitzvahs, sha'adam dosh ba'akeva, mitzvahs which to a person they seem very simple, nothing outstanding, nothing special. And a person that hears and follows these mitzvahs, tishmun, he will listen to them, then the reward which we will get from the Rebbe is a very outstanding reward. So actually what Rashi is really doing here, Rebbe says he's combining both taich in the word of Eikev. He says im, which means if, which is also a taich in Eikev, and right away also introduces the taich Sha'adam dosh ba'akevav, the mitzvahs which a person steps on with his heels. Usually when Rashi combines two perushim, he says there's one perush, and for whatever reason that one perush is insufficient, Rashi would always mention a second perush. Here Rashi is kind of combining both perushim. The truth is that the word Eikev is already mentioned in the Torah. This is not the first time where the Torah mentions Eikev. This is also one of the Rebbe's approaches, that wherever usually Rashi has to explain a word the first time that it's mentioned in the Chumash. First time it's mentioned, you have to know the taich of the word. Eikev we have already in Bereshis. Way back in Bereshis, by Avram we find Eikev Asher Shama Avram B'Koil. So what does Eikev mean there? Alright, there's a Chassidische taich which tells us that Avram was penetrated through and through with mitzvahs, that even his heel also followed the derech of Hashem. But again, that's not the Pasha the taich in the pasuk. The Pasha the taich in the pasuk there is Eikev if. Because the end result was that Avram heard the voice of Hashem. But again, throughout Chumash we find many more times where the word Eikev is mentioned, and still Rashi does not explain it. It is only here that Rashi finds a need to explain Eikev. Why? Because here Rashi is kind of like combining both Perushim together. The taich of Im, and also together with it the inyan of Adam Dosh Ba'akeva, which is Meloshin Eikev, Meloshin heel. In the Shia Rambam, which the Rebbe referred to, it's in the halachas of Parah Aduma. The Rambam explains us the way a Parah Aduma had to be made, the entire process of the Parah Aduma. And the Rambam says that first the water had to be poured, and then the ash had to be, it was burnt into ashes. The burning of the Parah Aduma. The Rebbe says in Chassidus it's brought, the Alter Rebbe explains in L'Kutei Torah the whole inyan of Parah Aduma. The Alter Rebbe raises a question. The pasuk says, "Zois chukas haTorah." This is a chukah. We know Parah Aduma is a mitzvah that goes into the category of chayk, because we do not know the reason for it. As famous Chazal that Shlomo HaMelech said, even Shlomo, who was the smartest of all people, said, "Amarti achakma," I thought I will be able to understand it. I will get the chachma of it. V'hi rechayka mimeni, and it is distant from me. So Shlomo also didn't know the reason of Parah Aduma. So it's called a chayk. The pasuk uses the expression "Zois chukas haTorah." So the Alter Rebbe in the Torah asks, why Zois chukas haTorah? This is nothing that has to do with the entire Torah. The pasuk should have used the expression "Zois chukas hapara." Regarding Paraduma, these are the chayk, these are the details which we are to fulfill, which falls into the category of chayk, not edus, not mishpat, but it only has to do with Paraduma. It doesn't have to do with the entire Torah. Indeed, Alter Rebbe explains in L'Kutei Torah that Bichlal, in Torah we know, in Avodas Hashem we know, Avodas Hashem is composed of two components. There is what we call in Chassidus a rotzui and a shoiv. Rotzui means the inner desire to become associated with the Rebishter, the thirst to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then we have the shoiv, which means the return into this world, realizing how the main thing is to be settled in this world and to firais, to accomplish dira b'tachteinim, to accomplish a residence for the Rebishter here in this world. This Indian is discussed at many, many places in Chassidus. How one goes hand in hand with the other. We cannot have a rotzui without a shoiv. Chassidus explains this is what went wrong by the children of Aaron. Nadav Avihu, when they brought the Ketores, it's explained the Chassidus at length, they were the Madrege, they had a rotzui, however they were lacking the shoiv. They did not realize the importance of returning. In other words, living here in Gashmias, that the main intention of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that through Gashmias, we accomplish for Him His real desire. His inner desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is fulfilled dafke through living on this world and being Mekayim Torah and mitzvahs through Gashmias, and this is the real desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Back to Paraduma, the burning of the ashes, that is the rotzu. Burning, the fire going up. What is the shoiv? The pouring of the water. So the Rebbe asks, based on this consumption, the Rambam paskins, what is the Seder HaAvodah? That the water has to be poured first, and later comes the Schreifa. How does this correspond to the Chassidish interpretation, which interprets it as Rotzui v'Shaiv, that we have the Shaiv before the Rotzui? The Derech HaAvodah is first the person has the inner thirst, the inner desire to get L'chkeit, and then he realizes Shuv, to return and live controlled in this world, and through this world serve the Rebishter. If we are saying that the pouring of the water comes first, the pouring of the water is the Shuv. The burning of the ashes, the turning it into ashes, that is the Rotzui. So we have the Shuv before the Rotzui, which is kind of strange. We always know first comes Rotzui, then comes Shuv. Basically what the Rebbe answered was, being that when the water is poured, we know that ultimately there is going to be the burning of the parah as well. So it's not the pshat that the Rotzui comes afterwards and the Shaiv comes first, even while we are pouring the water, which is the Shaiv. However, we are there right away realizing that what has to come next, and what is the main meaning of everything. What is the proper Seder HaAvodah? The proper Seder HaAvodah is the Rotzu. So even while doing Shuv, which is the pouring of the water, the mind of the person who's doing it is realizing that the Avodah cannot be complete, that afterwards it will be followed with a Rotzu. So again, it is not that the Rotzu comes after the Shaiv. Even when the Shaiv is done, there is also the intention of the Rotzu. This is how the Rebbe explained it. A gute Woche.